the difference of meeting mates. Our last asset.
They did a round table there for you, right there.
As the stomach turns, they get against them. And these are the days of our lives.
Oh,
I know you don't. We have a meeting.
right, he's in Scott right now.
Yeah, have you gotten the final things from everyone? No, I put mine.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna change anything. I had some emergencies come up personally.
I'm still dealing with one.
What?
I'm still dealing with one.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's been an interesting period of time.
It's only that one page, it's easy.
What?
It's only that one page, so.
I know, it's just,
You gotta, you make it thought process.
going through the thought
I was just
process.
gonna do a quick reminder if I want to make
As-
something.
You can do that, and then I'll start it, and then I'm gonna turn it back over to you. We'll go from there.
As little attention as we
Comment
get.
about where we
I
are.
want to put some forward.
All right, good evening, everybody. It is 6 o'clock,
Good evening.
so I want to be respectful of everyone's time and get started right on time. I know there were invitations extended to a number of elected groups, the school committee, the town council, the asset commission, the building committee. So this is an official meeting of the building committee. This meeting has been posted on the Secretary of State's website. In an effort to avoid any type of Open Meetings Act violations, it's just recommended that any elected or appointed group that's not the building committee avoid any discussions or groups as their own group. So just want to get that out there and just a quick reminder so that we don't get ourselves into trouble.
Thanks, Mike, thank you. And I'm just gonna open it up. So as for those of you who were at the last meeting, I'm gonna mention a couple things that you do know. For those of you who weren't, this may be helpful. The building committee, I know it hadn't met for a while. Just to let you know, up until the last meeting, the position of town manager was not on the building committee. At the time of a couple of meetings I had with the then interim superintendent, it was recommended that the town manager should be on the committee. I can tell you that from my past experience, most building committees do have the mayor, town manager, or council president as a co-chair. So to me, it made a lot of sense. And so I was more than happy to serve as co-chair with the then interim superintendent. I do have some experience on building committees, but last meeting was my first meeting. So as a result, I want to bring that to the attention because I think, and if everyone disagrees, let me know, I think it's really not conducive to this meeting or this committee to be productive if I am the chair. It's only my second meeting. And so I think it's important that we have some consistency. And I want to thank Mike for putting together the agenda, for making sure we get this meeting off the ground. I know there's a lot to cover, and while I know he's tied up right now, I'm gonna wait for a minute.
We're at the C2 door, which is on the opposite side of the building, sorry. I'll call Bob and have him meet you at A2.
Yeah, I can hear.
All right, bye.
I
And
recognize
so,
that voice.
so
My
I,
apologies.
oh, not at all, I know that you're getting people in the meeting. So I think it's appropriate for there to be a co-chair. I think that co-chair needs to be someone from the school department. I think the co-chair needs to have some consistency. And I think right now the most consistent person, non-elected in this position would be Mike. I wanna thank him for putting this together. So I'm gonna lead off by entertaining a motion to appoint Mike Waterman as the co-chair of the North Kingstown School Department Building Committee.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Time out.
I'm sorry?
Isn't it only the people on the subcommittee that's supposed to be voting on that?
Yes.
You guys don't qualify, sorry.
I was on the subcommittee.
We
You
don't know
want it
who,
too?
I don't know who's on this committee.
Oh, well, why don't you have the people?
I don't think that the committee's been decided yet, have they?
Well, there is an established committee. I
Have
wish
they
I
been
could,
appointed?
it's been a long-standing committee. And I know they've added a couple of people, but so I think it's been a
I
long-standing committee.
withdraw my motion.
Fair enough. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Excellent. I want to thank Mike for putting this together, for getting this off the ground. Hopefully over time, as I get myself acclimated, I can be much more help. But I'm here, as you know, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, everyone. Again, in an effort to be efficient and respectful of time, our second item of business tonight, I want to introduce Mario Carreño from RIDE. He's a Chief Operating Officer. Prior to that, he was something with SBA.
Director of the SBA and then finance officer for the SBA before that.
And for those of you who don't know, SBA is School Building Authority.
That's correct.
So I'll kick it over to you.
Great, thank you. So, in the spirit of fresh starts, I think this is a good time to come to this meeting, especially in, how are you? I'll do a quick overview of our process, just some opportunities that exist now, and then we can turn it over to questions and process. It's always good to start with what your neighbors are doing around you. I think that's a good thing. Just last week, Coventry voted on $80 million to do a new elementary school. South Kingstown is in the process of doing $100 million for a new high school. Westerly just approved $50 million for a new elementary school. East Greenwich is looking to do other work. So there are others who are, like North Kingstown, who are in this moment in time where they want to take advantage of additional state aid. So let's do a quick history for those who may not be aware. Unlike roads and bridges and fire stations and police stations, the state pays money for school construction, right? And the rationale for that is because students aren't voters, that they, when all things considered, without that extra incentive, roads, police stations, and town libraries would all win. So the state has put in a mechanism that historically was 30%, was raised to 35%, and for a 5-year period, if you hit certain milestones and incentives, the state would pay 50% more. So in this case, up to 52.5% reimbursement. That expires at the end of this year for projects that haven't been decided. So your timing is really good. There are at least 6 or 7 communities who are in this same situation where they see that money is about to go off, is gonna leave, and they wanna act. I know you have a stage 1 that's been approved by RIDE, and the next entry point is September of 2015. So it's not like you have to decide today or anything, but I'll map out the timeline and some of the discussions that we've had that have been helpful to guide you towards sort of the decision process. But it's a narrow timeline, and every day it gets narrower and narrower, and there's still a few left. We are willing to support anyone who wants to get something through. We'll come to as many meetings as possible, and we'll help you get something across the finish line. Because, what I told Coventry, and I go to almost all the building committee meetings, don't be left behind. They voted twice for the statewide bond, and up until now have not seen the dollar of it. All their money went to every other community. So in some ways, let's turn that around and get something here. And I know from discussions, and Jim's been around for years, there's been discussions, some of it's maybe hearsay or not, but whether you need a new middle school, for example. You have 2 middle schools that used to serve over 1,100 students, down now to 800. You have old, inefficient buildings that perhaps a newer one might be of interest. So again, this is the data I looked at this morning. A new middle school, based on what the state is paying now, would be about $80 million for a 130,000 square foot building. But again, you don't look at that price, you should treat it as like a sale price because the state puts in its money. So an $80 million project only costs North Kingstown less than $39 million. So I think when you decide not on the top line number, but decide on what your net cost is, because this is not the same as an $80 million police station. This is actually much less. So in this case, that's for that example. Your elementary schools, you have some that are small and outdated, that if you wanted to do that same newer and fewer, just like North Providence is doing, Coventry voted to close 3 schools into 1 because of operational savings, because of declining enrollments, and because many of their buildings aren't even worth investing in. So there's that part of the decision process. And it starts with, in all cases, and especially in this case, if time is of the essence and we're hitting this restart, is like what's palpable, right? If there's, this example, if there's not $200 million available, then let's not talk about $200 million possibilities. If there's not $150 million, then let's figure out where we are, and then we'll decide within that. Many communities start visioning and game planning for things that aren't even real, and you waste everyone's time. So in some cases, if 80 million, and this is again a function of the town council, of available bonding capacity, of the appetite of the voters, is to try to figure out what's the most that would be palpable to present to voters, and then you design a plan to do so, especially with this time frame. This is the same exact approach we did with Coventry, with Woonsocket, and with Providence. Again, let's figure out the number and let's get a solution because time is of the essence. And, you know, it would be a shame to consider this a similar project a year from now when, you know, in that $80 million example I gave, it would cost you $17 million more with the lost state aid and escalation for the same exact project now. So if you were, and there's a bunch of town priorities, just like I'm on the school committee for Lincoln, so I understand how it works. We negotiate with the town all the time. And what we tell our town manager and our town council, we have needs that the state's temporarily gonna give us 50% more aid. Town projects should wait a year so we can get that extra money. We can even use that extra money to help pay for town projects. So, and it's worked very well in Lincoln, it's worked in Coventry and other places. So even at a high level, there's a lot of state money available that if you figure out what you want, then I would go get it. Like I wouldn't spend time in South Kingston. I said, look, you don't have time to engage everyone for every possibility. If you know that the individuals in South Kingston want a new high school on the existing site, then why are we talking about anything else? So same here. If the middle school is what, and I don't know, and I'm assuming that you want a middle school, you may want something else. But if that's what you want, then don't spend any time on anything else. Spend on the main thing because that's where the most money will come from the state. Other health and safety issues, you can come before those every year. There's always money for health and safety. Let's be serious, right? There's not always the opportunity for new schools. So we have what's known as the necessity of school construction process. So there's two stages. Stage one is where you identify your needs. So that came in, I think, maybe a year ago in June, and then you list the condition of all your buildings. You have all the enrollment projections, capacities. You don't actually list out what you want to do, just that there's a need. And we know there's lots of needs across the state, it's not just here. And then stage two, which is the one that's due in September, is what are you gonna do about those needs? And that's when you negotiate with the town council and the school committee and any other budget boards you may have to figure out what your solution is. Is it gonna be just a 5-year plan for health and safety? That could be it. Is it gonna be for a new elementary school, or a new middle school, or both, or neither? Like, you would decide that over the next few months, because there's a couple of decision points that are coming up. The first one that's coming up is that if you are going to bond, you have to get enabling legislation from the General Assembly this session, and they end their session in June. This is why I recommend that if you are thinking of something bigger, you figure out your not to exceed number first, get that approved by the town council and moving to the General Assembly, because that's a different timeline than the actual projects you pick. So in some ways, if 100 million, and I'm just making numbers up, is what is palpable for North Kingstown, that you would do a not to exceed number, which gives you the option to go less, not more, and send that through while you figure out what that 100 million will buy you. And that gives you months to figure that out. But if you miss that first piece, then all of a sudden things start to become, the timeline just falls apart. So that's the first piece. Over the next 3 or 4 months, if you are considering a bond, I would work really hard together to figure out what that not to exceed number is and send it one direction, and then work with your school committee, with this committee, with your architect on what that would be. And again, if not, if it's gonna be health and safety, this is not as critical because health and safety projects don't get the max bonuses. This is the way that the system is structured. The state wants new schools, right? If we're gonna invest in buildings, we want assets that are gonna be around for 50, 60 more years. Some of these buildings aren't gonna be around, especially this one is one of them. It's already approaching 100 years, that it doesn't make sense to invest $20 million in a 100-year-old building. So, and we can do more details based on some of your questions, but in general, is there any questions on the process? I'm planning.
Have we met the first deadline?
Yeah, so the very first one was a stage one. If you hadn't done it, I was gonna advise that you get something in February 15th is the next point, but that's already in. You're in the queue.
What's the amount that we put in for it?
The stage one wouldn't give you an amount, it would be just basically an overview.
That we plan to do it, and we've already done the assessment of the needs assessment.
We're in the process of
report.
finishing that.
Well, there's a report that's been done also in all the schools, right?
That's the education.
Facility master plan.
Yes, right.
Which has some recommendations that the town has to discuss amongst
Oh,
themselves
right.
to determine what direction you wanna go in. Or do we go to another direction that's even different than what's indicated in the education plan, essentially?
So our next deadline is actually, the General Assembly approval.
So realistically, you'd wanna target early May to have that
Right,
decision
right,
point?
right, okay, and then by September, we have to have a relatively doable plan.
Yes, if you want like the detailed timeline, it would be, thankfully, there's no February 15th pressure point, you've already satisfied that.
Right.
So between now and let's say May 1st, you figure out what that number is and send that through to get your enabling legislation. You likely, because they have to design whatever the projects are and cost
Right,
estimate,
right.
and probably by the end of June, and 3 months enough time for you? Like, you have to figure out what you're actually doing for that money. September 15th, your stage 2 would be Do It Right, which would list the projects that you want the state to consider. You would then have to do a special election, likely in October or November. The state, typically we approve twice a year in May and December. We're gonna try to move it up to November this year because the way the legislation is written is that the temporary state incentives expire December 30th of 2023 for any work that hasn't started, and that's just measured by a signed contract. So as long as you have either a design-build contract or a construction manager, someone under contract, and you satisfy that timeline, you will get those bonuses, which in this case, you have a clear path for all 4 of them, which is
And
great.
the money that comes back to the town is, a proportion of the money that's been approved, and it's given back as we pay out
That's
our
correct.
bond issue.
That's right, so if you have $1 million a year debt service payment, you'll get the 400 and, the
Whatever,
520,000.
yeah, half of that, yeah, basically, half of
Correct.
that, okay. So that money, there's no, what is it, liens on that money.
Now, so the
It
state,
can be done any way that the town wants to do.
you can structure so we have, we can have a whole meeting on financing. North Providence was very creative a few years ago where they had 2 years of interest-only payments and then a huge $10 million payment because they wanted it up front, and then it lowered down to $1.5 million a year after that. So you can structure with your financial analysis how you wanna do it. Part of it is if you have other town bonds that might be coming off the books,
Right.
you wanna mirror those. That's very common where if you have debt coming off in 5 years, then minimize the first 5 years and then backload it so that it minimizes the impact on your taxpayers.
Yeah, we talked about that when we, went out with the last bond issue, because we had a fiscal cliff that we were going over, where money was available. Okay, so we could structure this in a variety of different ways in order to fund other projects.
Oh, it's very common.
Okay.
Rob, do you have a?
Yeah, Mary, I had 2 questions. One is more, I guess, not more philosophical than the second one. The second one's pretty important. The first one is, I know we're talking about newer and fewer. So if the town of North Kingstown were to go forward with replacing this middle school with a middle school, but keeping Davisville Middle School, that wouldn't fall under the bonus money.
Unless you could reuse. So the other thought is, if that, and I haven't been in that building, so I don't know if it's better than some of your elementary schools, for example. And you follow the train through where all the middle school kids are in the new building.
I was going away from that. So what I'm saying, I'm sorry, so
Yeah.
what I'm saying is that, and this is this is up to the school committee and educational people who are much more knowledgeable than me. In my position, my concern is that, I'm a fan of 2 middle schools, I'll put it around, and that's because, the different services that we provide, whether it's chess or basketball or drama or band or whatnot, if you have 16 kids from Davisville on this group and 16 kids from Whitford Middle on this group, and when you combine them, you now have 16 kids. You just left 16 kids out. So for a school a town of our size, I'm a fan of 2 middle schools. I think you provide double the services, double the opportunity, whether it's sports or drama or and so I'm a fan of that. One person, I could be completely outvoted here. My concern is that if everyone had agreed with me, do we lose the bonus money? Because we're not doing new.
Yeah, so if you have 7 buildings, and at the end of this plan, you have 7 buildings, you don't get it. So if you, as part of your plan, you got rid of an elementary school somehow, and still had 2 middle schools, that would qualify.
Excellent. So, and again, I'll leave that we'll talk about that later. The more important question As far as I'm concerned, I've heard some good news and bad news, not your fault. The good news is that we have till September 15th to do our stage 2. The bad news is that to get the bonus money, we need enabling legislation from this General Assembly, and we need to be on the ballot in 2023. Wow.
So I will say there are
And
many,
a special election.
especially,
Right,
yeah, there
2023,
are,
yeah.
there are at least 7 communities who are on this very tight track.
I'm just not sure if we're ready for that. We haven't talked finances with the town, we haven't talked debt cliff, we haven't talked our priorities, we haven't brought in PFM yet. I mean, and that's okay, it's not your fault, I was surprised, I thought that if we got stage 2 approved, that we're automatically gonna be eligible for that bonus money. You actually have to be in a referendum this year.
Yeah, because you can't start a project unless voters approve it, because if they reject it, then there's no project. But, for example, so Coventry and Middletown are actually doing special elections this spring, they don't even wanna wait till the fall.
Yeah.
So, but they knew their number, and they'll figure out
Exactly. I mean, as you know, to get a special election, to get a bond passed, the plan is gonna have to be pretty specific for the voter. You know,
Oh, yeah,
it's- No, I'm just saying, and I'm just, hopefully we can get to that point, but considering that it's January, that'd be interesting.
yeah, I mean, part of it is, that's why I say, like, if there's a 1 or 2 projects that you think that the townspeople, like, that jump off the page,
Yeah.
focus on those, don't worry about exploring 50 other, like, you don't have time to explore 50 options, that's the truth. But Coventry woke up really quickly, they're a few months behind you, they identified their project, they got the town council to approve it, and it's already up now at the General Assembly to move through. You have, Lincoln's on the same track as this community, South Kingstown's doing special legislation, I don't have the full list, but there's a bunch that act fast. And again, it helps if you know, like, this building is the priority, then you just spend your time on this, you figure out a number, it's possible. It is very tight, I hear you on that. We've tried last session to get the bonus extended. That did not pass through the House. We've tried again now to see if they can move that December 30th date to align with the end of the fiscal year till June 30th, 24. Thinking that if we make the change within a fiscal year, it's an easier ask. Maybe, but I don't plan on it happening. It could happen, that would be a great benefit, but, last year during an election year with everyone asking for a 3-year extension, I thought it was gonna happen. And they said the temporary bonuses are temporary is the response that we heard. So, I'm not here to scare you, but that's like the reality that likely that money will.
I have a quick question,
Yes, sir.
that is, if we built a new middle school and the reduction was Davisville Academy, which is, I don't know where that stands as far as, it's the special needs school, but it's only got 15 students in it.
I believe RIDE considers that a placement versus a school. So all the kids there are assigned to a home school, and that is their educational placement where they receive specialized
Yeah, so
instruction.
that doesn't have the school code, right?
It does not.
Yeah, so that's not technically. right.
Okay.
But, there's a line of thinking there that, you could, so the statute says school building. Could you make a case? Perhaps, I wouldn't think so, but others have made unique cases that you're like, whoa,
But
okay.
it's possible.
Yeah,
Maybe not probable, but it's at
Maybe
least
it's
worth
in the realm of,
exploring.
it's worth exploring. If that was, we told others, if that's what makes things move, then we'll listen to it, and if you make a logical case that, you're paying utilities and this and that, and it reduces your operating budget, and maybe, it's not a no, it's not a yes, but I would say that,
A definite maybe?
it's a solid maybe. It's a solid maybe. I wanna learn more about the building and all this other stuff, so it's a solid maybe.
It was an elementary school, and it's serving the district and other districts with 15 children.
It was built in 1954,
And
so it's an old building.
I have a question. I think you, no, go ahead.
Could you clarify what you said about having
No
a
timing.
design build or something under contract by the end of the year? So we would have to,
Yeah, so it's a great question. So the way the statute is written says that projects have to start construction by that date. We've interpreted as just a signed contract, because we don't want someone coming in and, taking down lights in the middle of the winter break because they want to qualify for that. So obviously, the other case we're making for extending the bonus to the end of the year is to align with summer equals construction schedule, where when kids aren't in session. What would happen is, to meet that deadline, what others are doing is concurrently with your vote in November, for example, many of them are looking to do RFPs in August, and then it'd be contingent on the vote. And then assuming the voters approve it, then you have a signed contract ready to go and meet that deadline. So, and again, once we get farther along, we can do a more detailed schedule with critical milestones and dates, if that's something that you're gonna pursue. But yeah, it becomes more complex now because everything is compressed. A year ago, individuals, you could do it all sequentially. Now things are gonna be multiple. Never would I say pick your number and send it to the General Assembly now before you even come through a process, because that doesn't make, in some ways doesn't make sense, because we might not even approve it. But if you wanna get through, that's the new norm for this year at least. And we'll work with anyone, because otherwise, we want projects to get done. For years, things weren't done anywhere across the state.
Claire,
Yes, ma'am.
question, did you say up to 52%? Is there a possibility that you could go through the whole process and not get that reimbursement, or is it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So the way it works, so your base rate is 35%, because you're considered a minimum share community. Though I believe there's also language, don't count on it, but if it goes through, to perhaps increase that to 40%, which would potentially get you 60% reimbursement. But again, if it happens, great. If not, don't bank on it. But 35% is your minimum. So the state has different incentives for you to do things differently beyond just health and safety. So there's a bonus for educational enhancement, which is worth 5 points. So if you want to renovate a space like this, which if you look at some of the newer spaces in the state, this is not one of them. I mean, it just isn't. Newer and fewer is a priority of the General Assembly, because we have 22,000 less students statewide than we did in 2003, over a 20-year period. The state doesn't need the same amount of buildings as we did then. Those buildings, it costs money to heat them and cool them and maintain them. Many of them are old. So it's incentivizing to do what North Providence and others have done, is you build one, close two, and the kids all get a new building. That's a bonus. The state, back in 2017, and we're doing another one now, did a statewide assessment of all facilities and gave everyone a score known as a Facility Condition Index score. It's basically a scale. 0 means brand new, 100 is really bad. Anything over 65 is known as a replacement candidate, that it might make more sense to do a new one than throw good money after bad. You have, you have at least one, and if we update the scores, because a lot of work hasn't been done, you might have 2 or 3 of them that would qualify. So by replacing one of those, doing newer and fewer, educational enhancement, and then there is still a health and safety bonus. That's your pathway to 4, which gets you the 52.5%. Now, in order of qualifying, as long as you get ROD approval, there's language in statute, you have to have an OPM. As long as you meet the criteria in statute, you will get those bonuses, as long as you have a signed contract by the end of this year.
Forgive me, I thought I heard you say the deadline was September 15th. Did you say 2023 or I thought I heard you say 2015, and I may have misunderstood you.
Yeah, sorry, September 15th of 23, this
Yeah.
stage 2 application
Okay,
is due.
just wanted to clarify.
Does the brand new school have to be in a new second area, or could you build it, say, right here?
So, that's a great question. There's a mix throughout the state. So if you have space for these kids, that's the first piece. If you have a swing space somewhere and you swing them out and you want to build it here, great, you can do that. If you want to buy land and have the state reimburse you on the transaction and build it there, you can do that too. So there's both. There's both examples. You might have town land or school land that, in Coventry's case, their middle school's on 100 acres. So, and a lot of it's just forested land. So they're gonna take some of that land and do it. But they were also looking at buying a property on Route 3 at the same time, but some other person came and swooped it up from under them. So now they're going back to their own town land. But it could be either. We have examples throughout the state. You might have fields here. Some will build on the field, move the kids over, demolish the building, and then flip the field. Yeah, there's a mix of possibilities, but you can build anywhere in town.
And Kelia Kentor, who now works
That's right.
at RIDE, did our educational facility master plan. As part of that plan, she looked at town available She looked at town-owned sites here in NK, as well as other open parcels. So if you look at the educational facility master plan, and this is posted on our webpage, if anybody doesn't wanna go search on our webpage, shoot me an email, I'll send it directly to you. But she did do an analysis of what we would need for a middle school. Top of my head, I believe it was somewhere in the 15-acre range, does that sound about right? For a school, that was looking at a single middle school of approximately 800 kids. We're looking somewhere around 15 acres or so. So she did look at town sites and where we ran into wetlands. You know, there was one site where it looked good, but then we ran into the wetlands. There was another site where it looked good, but then we ran into an easement from National Grid or Rhode Island Energy. I think there was another one that looked good until it was realized that it may be an old town dump. Does that sound familiar? So, she did look at the spaces here in NK, before coming to a recommendation of a site that we already own.
As far as, with you working with different, it sounds like, you've been working with a lot of towns and a lot of towns quickly. You've given a couple tips on like making sure to be focused and really try to work through some of the timeline issues. Are there other things that you're noticing are causing like kind of hiccups or things to consider that we should be pondering? Cause I wanna make sure if we are gonna proceed, we're doing it, like, I don't wanna have missteps
No, it's a
along
great
the way.
question, and I'll use South Kingstown as an example, who, they're probably like a few months ahead of you, that they didn't, they thought that they knew the number that the town wanted, so they're presenting plans up to that, and then the actual number ends up being about 30 million less. So that's why I like don't send them on a wild goose chase designing things that there's no architect for. Like that's the takeaway. If the limits, if it's for one middle school just replacing this, it's 50 million, fine. If it's for an $80 million one that does both, great. If you want to look at an elementary school, and great, but like figure that out first, because you don't have any time to be doing all these. Because then the other thing is, it's also tough, like a lesson learned. Once you see the $150 million option, and you only have 100, it doesn't. Your $100 million option doesn't look as good, right? So it's the same when you go buy houses. Don't look at the $2 million house if you were in the 400,000 range, because you'll never look at it. Same with cars. So same here with the tight timeline, and I think that they got it. They've honed in on the number, and now they're building and designing to that number, because otherwise, like, there literally is no time. With a different circumstance, I would be here saying something completely different. But I know, and again, I've been in, I think, almost every school building in the state. I've worked with almost every single town council, mayor and town administrator, that it is just way easier for them to put up money when the state's putting up extra money, and a lot of extra money in some cases, that if you were ever gonna do it, like, I'm not a salesman, but this is truly the time to do, literally, that $80 million project a year from now, if you go, oh, you know what, that's not a bad idea. It's a $17 million shift that goes from the state taxpayers to your taxpayers.
Can it be a combined program that's completed over in stages?
Yeah, so you get a 5-year approval from the state. That could include a medley of things. It could be some health and safety projects at your high school and at your elementary schools, a signature piece for a bigger building. Yeah, it could be a mix. Typically it's a 5-year ask. You can even include things that you may or may not do.
Right.
But it's always nice to have state approval, because if you decide in 3 years, I wish we could do the auditorium at our high school, if it's not approved, then the state will pay for it. But if you get it approved now, for the same, it probably won't change their fee, that if you decide in 3 years to do something of that nature, then you get
But it doesn't all have to be, it has to be started by December, but it doesn't have to be, you can do a contract, that's a 5-year contract.
So there's two, this is a great question, there's 2 ways to do it. The legislation allows you to combine projects and combine bonuses. So what some communities will do is, they'll figure out what project gets all the bonuses, and let's say that's gonna finish in 3 years, and then all the other work they do just comes with it. And then when they hand it into the state, it's an elementary school plus health and safety throughout, and then by combining it, everything gets all the bonuses. So you don't necessarily have to start every little piece if it's gonna combine with the larger piece. The other approach is to hire a construction manager for 5 years that covers everything. That would also satisfy that.
We have the need for a new school, but we also have $50 million of the other schools.
Mhm.
So
It might be
that,
more than that.
what?
It might be more than that.
Well, it's an old number.
Yeah, that was the leftover
Yeah.
from the last
So
5-year
what's
plan.
the-
So,
About 60 million.
I was gonna
So
say,
60, okay, so 60 million, so can you talk to those two numbers? Let's
Yes.
say it's one middle school and that 50 million.
Yes.
We are, you know, just talk it out.
Great question. So of that 60 million, there are likely some projects that are worth bonding for and other projects that aren't. You shouldn't be bonding for windows. You shouldn't be bonding for sprinklers. You should bond for things that you have no other alternative to pay for. So if you were gonna do, the one example I always give is if you wanted to upgrade your auditorium, which is could be a $4 million project, the town usually doesn't have that kind of cash to do so. But windows you can do in phases. So if you do, one of the things that other communities are creating is known as a revolving fund. So Lincoln, I'll do an example who just did this. Lincoln gets the same reimbursement rate as North Kingstown. The town had a vacant building that they sold to a charter school. It was for $5.2 million. They put it into an account just for school projects, and then by taking advantage of the reimbursement every year, over a 5-year period, it does 10 million of work. So if you do 5 million, you get back 2.5 million. You complete that, you get back 1.25 million. I can give you examples of the resolution, but it's a cost-effective way to trim down that 60 million. Not everything there has to be done. I think there's like a priority and a wish list, and not everything has to be done at once, and I certainly would have bond for all of it, like not for health and safety, because the other piece is it also really locks you into these buildings. Some of these, if you put in 10 million in a bond and Band-Aids, and then 10 years from now, you're like, oh, maybe we should have done a new one. It's like, it's really hard to convince taxpayers that it's like you threw away $10 million for something later. So I'm not denying you need 60 million to work. I would just take a harder look and siphon out, like, there's pieces there that need to be bonded, and there's pieces there that shouldn't be bonded.
how about roofs?
I mean, yeah, it depends. Some of them are very expensive. You can also do roofs in phases. You can patch it. Like, again, it's case by case. I would look at your building portfolio. Some schools, are gonna be around for the next 30 years, no matter what, just because of their age. I think your high school is relatively new. That's one. And if that is like a $3 million new roof, that should be bonded. I'll give you that. But some of these, if you're not clear, it's a smaller amount, I would have reservations on doing that.
I was specifically thinking of the high school roof.
Yeah, I think the high school, that's what, 25, 22, that one, keep that up to date, otherwise, like other schools around the state, you don't maintain it, that's a nice asset to protect, so. Of that 60 million, I would try to put a bunch into your high school to keep that up to date, that building's gonna be here. Some of the other schools, like windows, honestly, like, unless they're cracked, I mean, the kids don't benefit from that. So, the other thing we tell towns is, of that 60 million, the most important projects are the ones the kids and your taxpayers can see. Nobody sees a fire alarm or a fire sprinkler. Nobody sees a window that's not cracked. As long as it's fine, I would focus on areas like this. This is, if you go throughout the state, their media centers actually look very different than this one. The auditoriums, the cafeterias, science labs, like there's high-profile spaces that I would focus on because all the kids use it, like you get educational benefits, and then the community can use these spaces well, and they also can enjoy it. We have East Providence, for example, just added a gym to one of their elementary schools because the community can come, Parks and Rec can use it on the weekend. So that's a strategy here. If you were looking to add gyms, that's what Lincoln's gonna be doing very soon. We'll be adding gyms to their elementary schools because those are both projects that there's actual need. So in Lincoln's case, they offer, I think it's like 1/7 of what they should be for, they have a cafeteria, many have gymatoriums that are really tiny. In I don't know if you know Lonsdale Elementary School, the gym is like this big for 300 kids, and the reason that the town is interested in the gyms is because the community can use it as well. So that's, yeah, if you focus on high-profile projects that get voters to come see it, that make taxpayers say, oh, that's where my money went. I can see that. That's where this goes. Oh, and kids can immediately see it. Those are the best projects. I know you have to do windows, but do them as they break, or do them in phases. Don't just do health and safety. So you have to do health and safety, but like in a thoughtful process. Usually that's been the bar, and that should be like the expectation. That's not the goal. The goal is too low for health and safety. we as a state need to do better. And we have a lot of great examples, a lot of stories that are happening, and again, it goes back to this bonus, it's very easy to get voters to come out, to get town councils to say, oh, I like this idea of an extra 17 million in aid to do something that we were already considering or may have been considering.
As far as what you mentioned with the 5-year plan, I assume that inflation isn't factored into the reimbursements, and so
No, when you get
like,
approved,
what will happen, yeah.
there is an inflation escalation number that's
Yeah.
built in to your.
But if it exceeds that, we would.
Yeah, so that's a great question. We're seeing that now. So you have a couple of ways to deal with that. The first one is you can, what I was doing, the easiest is to then refine your plan. So if you get approved for 130,000 square feet, for example, which is the max that our regulations allow, you don't have to go for the max. Many communities are going under the max, just the most the state would pay for. So if you can really, minimize your circulation, you have less hallways, you think about things differently, a smaller building costs less. So some are doing that approach. Others are then looking at their full approval from the state, and if, maybe they can find a more cost-effective solution to one of the schools and shift budget over here. I mean, we'll work with communities to do so, but that is a challenge that is real.
One other question about kind of what you were talking about of how they're kind of some districts or towns are doing kind of combination projects to fulfill multiple needs. Another thing that we've definitely been talking about in town is some sort of rec center, et cetera. And so is there, with the education facilities, like is there a certain percentage, like if it's, like if we did a gym or different things like that might fulfill multiple purposes, is there any concern regarding like what's a school and what's an educational facility and what's not?
Great question. So what we'll ask for is show us your schedule of how you would use it during the day.
Mhm.
As long as, and obviously during school hours, you're not gonna open this to others, so as long as you show that while school's in session, there's a need for it, you'll get that approved. So that's the key. There's some examples we've had, we're gonna use it twice a week, and then all of a sudden, that's really then a town project in disguise here. But if the plan is to use it throughout the day, but also, you could do adult leagues in the evening, you can do indoor soccer, you can do it,
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Not trying to skirt it, but just trying to make sure that we're clear on what that means and
Yep.
what opportunities there are.
Yeah, so Lincoln is building a physical education center right now at their high school. And they first showed the need, so when they did a $60 million renovation to their building they completed in 2020, they didn't have enough money to do everything, so the gym is undersized. The regulations allowed 20 square feet, I'm off memory now, so it may not be exact, but 20 square feet per student. Lincoln was offering, I think, 9 square feet, so there was a need for it. They showed us the need, they showed us how it would be used throughout the day and for other events like high school graduation, this and that, so it was a primary use for Lincoln Public Schools, but Parks and Rec is gonna use it for indoor soccer and basketball and other events, so that it's gonna be open to the senior center and others, so it should be used as much as possible by the community. Everyone pays taxes, everyone should use it, but we just make sure that the main purpose is for education. In this case, if you build it to a new school, it's clear that it's for that purpose.
And Laurie, it is not attached, right? It's gonna be a separate building from the high school I'm thinking Lincoln, because I was just there.
It could be either.
Right, so it doesn't have to be attached
That's right.
to a new middle school or to an elementary school. On our property, able to be used by the school, but doesn't have to be attached per se.
That's correct.
But it does have to be utilized during the day by the schools.
That's right,
So that's where the issue is.
yeah, like the
Yeah.
farther you make it from the school, the harder the case
Yeah.
is. So
We're
Lincoln's
looking
case-
at South Kingstown, that rec center. I mean, it's a rec center. It's separate from the schools, regretfully, because I'd love it 55%, or 52.5%, so.
I mean, so to be honest, like part of, with a lot of these towns, is like, what are some of the other priorities you want, and is there a way we can include it all together? So North Providence, this past summer, one of their priorities was to free up space in Centerdale where the school administration department is, because a lot of businesses have trouble with parking, so if we can clear them out and get parking, that solves one thing, and that actually is how we started. What about, you have 3 other elementary, you did 2 of them, you have 3 left, how do we, everyone gets they got 80%, which is a better deal, but all of a sudden, something that benefited the town also benefited the school district, and then all of a sudden, it passed by a resounding margin in the November vote. So I would, if that, like, I like this approach, like, are there other town priorities that you're thinking about? And if so, how can we find a way to combine these in a unique way that maybe we do find a way, let's go back, for example, if you did the two middle schools, maybe one rec thing is with one of them, and the other one's somewhere else. I mean, we can have those discussions, but I like that line of thought, is like, what are the priorities, what's the money, and how do we make this work for the whole town?
And we have to obviously have those conversations and think about it, but I just wanted to, since you're here and giving us your time, I wanted to kind of get some of those things, like, make clear so that we can have those conversations
Yeah, no,
about what our priorities are and what.
This is the time, right?
Yeah.
You don't have much time, and I think everything is anything's possible, hypothetical, I like this.
I love hypothetical, I was
Yeah.
gonna put you back on the spot.
Hypothetical. Let's just say that we wanted to do pre-K and we wanted to combine a couple elementaries. And we said, maybe this building would be that, and build a rec center on the same property. Right here.
So this would be
Elementary, maybe combine two elementaries into this building and a rec center on this property. This is just, I'm thinking, you know, and you put that in a bond because now you closed an elementary school. And this building, you know, it may not be good for middle school, but maybe in elementary school it might, parts of it may still be. But you're building a rec center. and
I
you're
like
doing
the line of
upgrades.
thought, I would say it would be.
And it could be another school building.
Yeah, like.
You do the same thing, but I'm just saying, we're sitting here, but if you did something like that, so that you're doing two things, you're doing the elementary schools and a rec center.
I think the smoother path for that would be a new building with some rec centers for the whole district. Like, so Providence years ago, at the Providence Career and Tech Academy, they got approved for a larger gym than normally would because they said that Central High School, Classical High School, and the Career and Tech Center would all use this district-wide gym, and it was a larger thing. You know, maybe that's line of thought would work, but I think it's hard in this, like, it would be hard to have like a prize gym without a prize school to go with, like, even just to get it through. Like, if they both came together, you did a new middle school
Okay.
that had a district-wide.
You have RIDAS standards for elementary school gyms.
Yeah, there's
Right.
there's space standards, so it's like 5,000 or 6,000 square feet for elementary
Right,
school.
right.
It's bigger, but if you have, you know,
You have to have
if you made the case, like, so Providence made it because the kids will use it. So in middle school, it's an easier case because there's like actual athletics.
Interscholastic.
That's right, so that would be your case, if you have all these kids, and it would, middle school gyms are granted at a larger size than elementary schools, that's why, if you were gonna tack it onto one, and your goal is to have the biggest venue possible, it would be with the middle school, because that gives you a larger square foot that the state would reimburse. You could also do, you know, if the state reimburses 10,000 square feet as an example, and you wanted to do 12,000 square feet, then we would just prorate it. You could still do it, we would just prorate it, and then a piece of it you would.
You know, trying to get into your logic is what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
Hypothetical.
Yeah, no, I mean.
And that was a good explanation of, you know, how you make it.
Do you all have any numbers as far as like how, if you combine 3 elementary schools, for example, like the cost savings from not just a building standpoint to
Yes.
run it, but administratively, that could give some guidance to our
Yep.
conversations?
So
It would, like-
Coventry is closing, Hopkins Hill, Black Rock, and Tyoke together, they estimate the operational savings, which is utilities and maintenance, and then, you know, do you need 3 assistant principals, whatever it is, between $250,000 and $500,000 per year. So over the life of the bond, it ends up being around $10 million in operational savings by combining, so that's something to consider. There might be, like, again, that's in their case, you might have other ones, but that's a number that they presented to the town council last week, but that one I'm familiar with. But there are savings, and, you know, the other piece, by doing the newer and fewer, is many times you can offer things that you wouldn't be able to offer with the smaller schools. So some elementary schools have art on a cart because they don't have this, or they can't offer science because there's not enough interest for all 3 of them, or even for languages. You know, if they want to offer Mandarin, for example, you might have some kids at one school who want it, some at the other, and you offer it nowhere because they're not in the same spot. So there are pros and cons to these larger buildings, but many of them are moving that way because you can design in a way that they don't feel big, but you offer way more programs than you do individually.
Is there a minimum school size to qualify, particularly at a middle school, for like an auditorium?
So minimum, like, we have maximums, we have, and this is where we have the the two extremes. We have many districts want to go above and beyond it, and then many charter schools want to, because they're paying for it, they want to cut it as little as possible. So we have some, you know, when charters apply, we actually have to push them up. If it seems too small, and other districts, we usually have to bring them down. I would say this year, because of the pricing that you mentioned, many are not approaching the maximum square feet. They're saying if we could refine this and have a smaller footprint, it's a smaller cost, but it can still have the same outcome. But yeah, to directly answer your question, there's no minimum. Though the smaller you get, you have to justify you can actually deliver school in a smaller building. That's one of the exercises, but there's no limit on smallness. Yes, sir.
You mentioned Coventry's going for combining 3 elementary schools. What's that bond question would be?
80 million.
80 million? So, alright, so new middle school would be 80, a new,
Yeah, so for
three
that,
elementary schools combined would be another 80. To be, if we were to go explore those two
oh,
options.
and that's a 3-to-1. If you did a 2-to-1, I think.
It'd be less, but if you were gonna combine 3, it would be 160 ballpark is kind of what the
If
going
you did,
rate
yeah,
is.
if you're looking to do, you know, a new middle school combining 2 and 3-to-1, it would be 160.
Yeah.
I think I looked, quickly that 2 of your smaller schools, if you did 2 elementary schools into 1, it might be 50 million because, but there's options where you can add in. Newport was the first one to do this back in 2013. They had 4 small elementary schools throughout the city that were in really rough shape, and then they built the Pell School, which is now award-winning. They actually had to add an addition because so many people wanted to come back to actually use the school. For years, people were leaving Newport because they didn't want to be part of that, and now it's turned around. The momentum of that building, they turned around and they got a bond for a new Rogers High School, which now is under construction, and then they're looking to do perhaps another middle school because there's an excitement. But the moment you start hitting home runs, people get excited and then demand more buildings like it. You know, it's hard to leave it half done. For North Providence, they had 6 elementaries. Back in 2018, they decided to focus on 3 of them. They closed 1 and did Newer and Fewer with 2, which are amazing, but then they left 3 others behind that are not amazing. And now all of a sudden they've decided they want to take advantage of the 20% and let's get in here and do it. In their case in particular, timing is everything. Back in 2012, they were at 38% reimbursement. So if they had attempted the project then, they would have paid the majority, and then timing has it that they're gonna get 80% paid for by the state this go around, so.
If you were to go with again, a hypothetical, if we were to combine middle schools, go with a single middle school, but then close 2 elementary schools and put them in the vacated other middle school, is there money available, or is there reimbursement available to rehab
Yes,
that other middle school
yes,
at the same full reimbursement rate?
that's correct. As long as it's all one project, so this is where, once you know what your project is, we even have meetings just on sequencing, like to make sure that you will get those bonuses. So the way we measure it is your project, so a 5-year approval could have 100 projects, it could have 1 project, you can define that. Whenever you're done and you hand in to the state, you know, stack of documents, this is our project, you are defining what that is. So is that a new school? Is that a new school plus renovations? Is that this and that? You know, you also, because if you, and again, we can do a whole session on financing, but in your case, you might have enough possibility for the bonuses that you could do, you know, in year 2 is the rehab, which gets the max, and then year 4 you hand in the other school when it's done. Like we can have options on that, but we can set it up so that everything gets the maximum. I think that's the goal for most communities, that if 52.5% is available and that's what you're telling your voters, you need to deliver that. Like you shouldn't be, it's wrong to deliver less. So we'll work with any community to make sure that you get the maximum.
What's Coventry's reimbursement rate?
So their base rate is 49.2 this year. They move up and down. So with the bonuses, they're targeting 69.2, but that was the incentive to do the 3-to-1 trade.
Because you can see, that's not, it's all calculations well beyond you. I mean, obviously, the calculations are according to the demographics, but I mean, North Providence is at 80, Coventry is 70, and we're at 52.5. It's a dramatic difference. It's still a great incentive, but it's a pretty dramatic difference.
No, it's true. Like Middletown is one who, the very first meeting I have, and the question from town council, how do we get 80%?
Yeah.
And then, which is it's true.
Yeah.
And then they actually were very close to regionalizing to getting. There's ways in statute to do it if you pick. Again, hypothetical. If you turn us off, he's going to say, hey, you want to become one district? We can both get 80%. That's a real thing. But that's also much larger, like, that's years of discussion.
Any bonus for Jamestown kids coming to the high school?
Well, if you call it, if you become one
Not
district,
their rates.
the answer would be yes, if you became one, but if just getting, their kids, the answer is no to that. But there are, so Middletown, let's go back to their example, the town council next week is voting on 170 million for a new middle, junior high together at the same rate as North Kingstown, 52.5%. Cumberland is looking to do a new BF Norton, I believe this year, and they get the same rate. Lincoln is looking to do something, and they get the same rate.
When's the Middletown election? You say next week?
The town council's gonna authorize it
Gotcha.
but they're doing a spring vote.
Spring?
There's two, I think there's two towns, right, that are doing.
Coventry and Middletown are both voting in May. So they have their numbers, they're sending it to the General Assembly, and they're gonna ask the voters to vote for it in May.
Is there any concern about people bidding on RFPs with the amount of school construction happening, and what happens if there's not, if people aren't bidding, if there's not availability to get people under contracts, and if they're not able to do the work in 5
Excellent, so
years?
that is the very reason that both Middletown and Coventry want to go to bid early, because once you have voter approval, you can start going out for contracts. You just can't, you need the state approval to actually cash it in, but you'll be in place, so that's why, that was their logic to move forward now. This is the very logic we're using to the General Assembly, that if they could move that date even 6 months to June 30th, 24, it spreads out the bids, because that's a legitimate
Yeah.
concern. We will have likely a record approval in December of '23, because everyone wants to come in to get bonuses. And if everyone is bidding at once, and not only everyone,
Are
we're
you
looking.
restricted to just Rhode Island companies? I would imagine that's the preference, but.
No, a lot of it is a preference, but a lot of out-of-state firms are coming because
Yeah.
there's so much work. And not only would you be, here's what makes it really complicated, is not only are you bidding against the ones who are looking to get approval, Warwick just got voter approval for 2 high schools, $350 million a few months ago. Pawtucket got approval for a new high school, $330 million. They're going out to bid at the same time. Providence is in the middle with a $500 million plan, many of those go, so there's a lot of things here that if, it sounds crazy, but if you knew, like, you know what, there's a number, because the beauty of saying not to exceed is you can always go less. So if you knew a number that is the most that the town would ever consider, and you wanna send it forward, but then you say, you know what, we only wanna actually issue half of that, great, but at least you get that track moving and you allow yourself to beat others to the market.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
How long does it take to actually build a school? I know the high school took us about 4 years to build.
I think 3 years.
3, how long would it take, if you were to say, boom, here's a piece of land, you gotta build a school, how, does that take 3 or 4 years?
That's a good estimate. Part of it is like, do you need swing space? Like, do you need to do some of these sequencing? So some communities do things, so Central Falls is a good example. They have land to do a new high school, which they're gonna build, and Central Falls is a small little city, so they don't have many choices. They have one park that they're gonna build a high school on. As soon as it's built, they're gonna tear down the high school and then build another new school on that one. So their plan will take longer, because they have to wait sequentially. If you have a blank field ready to go, 3 years is probably right, maybe a year of design and 2 building, maybe plus or minus a few months, depending on the size of what you want. But you do have to end, so statute has not just a beginning date, but also an ending date. So your work has to be done by December 30th of 2028. So you get 5 full years to do whatever it is that you come in for. As long as you finish it by then, you'll get those bonuses.
Bless you.
Substantial completion.
Okay.
I have a question about, are there any programs, at the state level that are focused on, energy efficiency, for the schools to reduce operating costs that could be added to this? So like, for instance, if you're gonna build a new school, making sure that, I don't know, it has solar panels or something on it to reduce the operating costs.
So great question. The answer is yes, there is. In our school construction regulations for new schools only, there is an incentive. The issue is that, and we find this across the state, that the other 4, you're capped at 4 bonuses, the other 4 become easier to get. So districts will want the other 4 and they don't chase the energy efficiency one. So it's there, like you should do it because there are savings and so in the physical education center project in Lincoln that I mentioned, they're adding solar panels because over a 20-year period, it's gonna reduce the operation cost by 1.5 million. So it makes sense to do it. The challenge with this cap, it's like, if you do that bonus, like, you don't get another one. So, you know, we can see what your project is. If you choose not to do even fewer, then maybe that's the avenue where you still get the maximum, because you're gonna prioritize energy and not do even fewer. So it's there, but many have gone with the others because the others are actually easier to get.
But at the end of the day, our municipality would need to have the state legislature pass legislation for a not to exceed on or around May of this year. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
so the session ends in June, but I think last year the date was May 13th that they wanted all final bills to be introduced. So you still have about 4 or 5 months to hone in that number. In Coventry's case and others, like, the not to exceed is a nice compromise, where it's the most we would consider if what you present is amazing. And if what you present is okay, then we'll pick a number that's more appropriate, and that's what you'll move forward with.
And is the General Assembly generally receptive to receiving not to exceed?
Yeah, most of them are written in that manner. So in most cases, and just because voters approve a number, you never actually have to take that number out.
Okay.
Some committees will do less, but I can't think of one example of enabling legislation that was, they all sail through because everyone benefits from that.
Yeah, Mario, for the most part, historically, I don't think the general, and I'm just repeating what you just said, the General Assembly has never not passed enable legislation, provided it had a council resolution.
That's correct.
Without a council resolution, it's dead in the water.
Yep.
So typically it would have to be essentially approved by the school committee.
Yep.
Come to the council.
Yep.
Approved by the
General
council, then sent to the assembly.
Yes. I mean, we'd have to talk with finance. I mean, Mario mentioned some great points about how you can be work with PFM, be very creative on the funding, work toward that cliff, have interest only at the beginning, just to lessen the burden, because again, I know I'm repeating myself, you know, a lot of these communities that you mentioned, and I've been talking to mayors and managers, you know, who's at 70, who's at 80, who's at 90, you know, Providence, Central Falls, North Providence, I wish we were in that pot. You know,
It's not gonna change though, right?
No,
Right,
no.
ever. So I think the thing that, when I'm thinking about this is, that part's never gonna change,
No, it's
and
not.
so that base is there, and so just thinking about the opportunity, especially with the need, and I think we're gonna take a tour, Mike, right, of the building?
So, and I wanna be respectful of Mario's time, are there any other questions for Mario? I don't mean to, not trying to limit it, but it sounds like we're kind of ending the question and answer phase.
Thank you for the time, really
Yeah,
appreciate
very
it.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, yeah, good luck, and,
And you're welcome to stay for the tour if you.
Yes, you are welcome, if you like.
When you're done, you may give us the 80%.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
We're gonna do a tour right from here, I'm just gonna stop the recording, so it's not 20 minutes of.
We're coming back here?
We're gonna come back here, yep. So I wanna introduce Allison Palladino, who is the current, principal of Whitford Middle School. Both her and Bob Correnti, our facilities director, they're gonna kind of lead us on the tour. The first thing I wanna point out that's unique about Whitford Middle School is we are in the basement, but in order to go to the other side of the basement, we're gonna have to go up a flight of stairs, across the cafeteria, and then back down. So that's, having spent 4 years as the assistant principal here, this is one of the unique bits of Whitford Middle School. When you say you go into the basement, you have to say which part. So let me start it, we'll start on this part, maybe we can check out the boiler room. We're obviously in the media center here, we'll take a peek at some classrooms, then we'll be on our way.
In our media center, just for your update, we have a little bit of a maker space over here. So my library media specialist teaches library research and methods, and